Masechet Yevamot, Daf Samech Aleph. We begin with another halacha from Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Last time we ended off with a halacha from him that was a leniency. Said someone who converts as an infant under 3 years old is permitted to marry a kohen, and he learned this from the woman who survived the Midian War, the woman who were allowed to stay alive during the Midian War. And he's going to bring another halacha that also has to do with non-Jews, and he will also bring a source from that same scene of the Midianite War. So Tanya, v'chen haya Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai omer, kibrei goyim enan metamein be'ohel, that the graves of non-Jews do not cause tent impurity. Corpses, Jewish corpses, have this unique feature that's not found in any other type of impurity. They're not just by touching or other ones are sitting on, things like that. But this one, if it's in the same overhang, the same roof as someone else, then everything else on that overhang that's together with the Jewish body will become tameh. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, this does not apply to corpses of non-Jews. Shneimar va'eten ve'aten osoni son mar'iti adam atem kiruim adam ve'en haguim kiruim adam. This from a pasuk in Yechezkel is his first proof that Hashem calls Bnei Israel, you are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and then says you are Adam. So you see here that this is referring to the Jewish people are called Adam. Now the whole law of tent impurity is found from a pasuk that mentions Adam. Adam ki yamut be'ohel. If a man dies in ohel, then everything in that tent becomes impure. So he learns from here that you, meaning Bnei Israel, are called Adam, and Goyim are not called Adam, and therefore it's actually a leniency also here. This will make life, if we follow this will make life for Kohanim a lot easier. For example, nowadays, can a Kohen go into a hospital? Well, generally there are dead bodies in a hospital somewhere. Can you assume, so then Kohen would not be able to go in? On the other hand, if you say, well, the dead bodies are probably non-Jews, and who says they're Jews, then it would be easier to permit such a case. Or going on an airplane where bodies may be transported if they're packed in a certain way, and Jewish bodies are, then that's okay. But if it's not, then that will be a problem for a Kohen, and so on. There's lots of cases where, how about a Kohen going into a non-Jewish cemetery? In the cemetery, you're not touching the corpses themselves, but rather that there may be an overhang, a tree or something, overhanging the grave and the person. So this will have a lot of effects, and so Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is lenient. Now we challenged him. Metibe v'nefesh adam shisha asar aleph. Regarding the war with Midian, it says the word Adam, that the Midianites who were killed were 16,000 people of the soldiers. And so these are Midianite men, and it calls them Adam. So this is a challenge. See, the word Adam does mean non-Jews. And we answer, Mishum Behema. No, it only says Adam there to distinguish 16,000 human beings, as opposed to also the animals that were taken captives as spoils of war. And so it depends on the context. Rashbi is not saying that every single place where it says Adam refers to Jews. It's on a case-by-case basis. But you have to look at the context. And if the context is to distinguish it from animals, then yes, Adam can refer to Jews and non-Jews. But without that, in a context alone, Adam, like in Yechezkel, and like in the source for tent impurity, in Bemidbar, it means only Jews. Asher yesh ba harbe mishetem asre ribo adam asher lo yada ben yimino lismolo behema rabba. The very last pasuk in Yonah, Hashem comes to Yonah and says, well, you used to think I shouldn't have mercy on this city, that there's more than 120,000 Adam who don't know their right from the left, and there's also a lot of animals. So there, it's referring to the Assyrians who live in Nineveh. These are not Jewish, and it calls them Adam. So how about that, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai? And you can answer the same thing, Mishum Behema, because the end of the pasuk says, and also there are a lot of animals there. Hashem also wants to have mercy on the animals and not kill them. if he doesn't have to. Kol horeg nefesh v'chol nogea bechalal tithateu. Okay, now another challenge to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is from this pasuk regarding the war with the Midianites. It says, whoever has killed anyone, whoever has slain, you should purify yourself. Moshe gives them orders afterwards that all the soldiers who either touched a dead body or killed someone need to purify themselves, meaning that they became tameh. And so that means they could have become tameh also from non-Jews. Right now we're assuming that they was beyond with tent impurity. Okay. Dilma iketil had misrael. So Rashbi can answer, no, maybe there was a Jew also who was killed during the war, and the Jewish soldiers went to take care of, to cover up the body of their Jewish friend. And that's how they became tameh, not from the bodies of the non-Jews. Okay, V'Rabbanan, and Rabbanan who disagree with Rashbi, and they say that tent impurity applies also to non-Jews. Lo nifkad mimenu ish. The rabbis here challenge Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and say the pasuk also says that there was not one of Bnei Israel who was missing, not accounted for, indicating that not one Jew died in the war. So there were no Jewish bodies. If there was any impurity, then that impurity had, and there was impurity, had to come from non-Jewish bodies. So you see there, from here, that non-Jews do impart impurity. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Rabbi Shimon says, no, that pasuk is talking about that there was not one man among us who was not counted regarding sin, meaning none of them sinned. With the daughters of Midian, none of us was missing because of transgression, that they would have sinned and then had to be punished. So it doesn't mean that nobody died. It was that any impurity that happened there was because of Jewish bodies who died. All right, now that's all one answer. Now here's the second and last one. Ravina amar nihi de ma'atin hu kera me'it muye be'ohel tichtiv adam ki amut be'ohel mimagal masa mi'atin hu kera. Ravina says, yeah, hold on. The pasuk in Bemidbar excluded non-Jews from getting ohel, from imparting ohel tum'ah. That's where it says Adam. But from touching and carrying, it never said excluded them from that. And therefore, non-Jewish bodies, even though they do not impart tent impurity, they do impart touching impurity. And that could more easily solve this question that we had. How come Moshe Rabbeinu told everyone that they should purify themselves because they may have killed someone or touched a body? So instead of saying, oh, well, there were also non-Jews, and then you have to have a difficulty reading this, lo nifkad, much easier to say that in the act of killing them, they also touched them, carried them, and these were non-Jewish bodies. So yes, the impurity happened because of touching, but not because of tent impurity. So that would be a simpler way of resolving that question. Halacha lemaz is the end of the discussion, and Rambam here follows the lenient opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and says that non-Jews, in fact, do not impart tent impurity. All right, so that's an important and very relevant topic. And next Mishnah goes back to Kohen Gadol. Eras et almana v'nitmana lihiot Kohen Gadol yichnos. We had this case already. A regular Kohen does erusin with a widow, which is permitted to do. That's fine. And then all of a sudden, he's appointed to become Kohen Gadol. He can continue with the marriage, even though he's now Kohen Gadol, and he would not be able to initiate Kiddushin with a widow. Since he already did Kiddushin, he can finish the rest of the process and do Nisu'in. And in fact, there was such a case. U'maaseh b'Yoshua ben Gamla shekidesh et Marta bat Baitos. U'minau HaMelech liot Kohen Gadol uchnasaha. There was such a case of Yoshua ben Gamla. He's one of the last of the Kohanim Gedolim, right before the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. He's mentioned in Josephus. And he, before he became Kohen Gadol, he did Kiddushin with Marta bat Baitos. She was one of the richest women in Israel, in Jerusalem, from the Baitos family. She's famous in the destruction of Jerusalem stories for having a lot of money, but she was no bread to buy, and she went out and stepped on dirt and died. because she was used to such a high lifestyle. Anyway, the king, and it's not unclear referring to which king it's referring to. Okay, but some king appointed Yoshua ben Gamla to be Kohen Gadol after he did Kiddushin, and he went ahead and continued with the marriage, and there was nothing wrong with that. So this actually happened. Shomeret Yavam shenafla lifnei Kohen Hediot v'nitmana liot Kohen Gadol af al pi she'asa b'ma'amad harei ze lo yichnos. But this case of Erusin is distinguished with the case of Yibum. If a woman is Shomeret Yavam, her husband died without children, and she is now a Yevamah waiting for her Yevamah, who is a Kohen, a regular Kohen. She was married to a Kohen. Now she's waiting for a regular Kohen. A regular Kohen can marry a widow, so he can do Yibum. But then in the meantime, before he did Yibum, he became Kohen Gadol. Now this is a problem. He cannot go ahead because now that he's Kohen Gadol, he cannot marry an Almanah. And even if they do Ma'amar, which is a type of Kiddushin, and you might think that this case of Kiddushin is equivalent to the opening case. He already had Erusin before he became a Kohen Gadol. He's allowed. So you might think if he did Ma'amar before he became Kohen Gadol, then he'd be allowed to continue. And the answer is no, lo yichnos. And the Gemara will explain the difference between the two cases. Part of it is that Ma'amad is not as strong as Kiddushin. It's only kind of a derabanan. Okay, tenor banan minayin sheim iras eta almana v'nitmana liot Kohen Gadol sheichnos. How do we know the first halacha of the Mishnah? This Baraita asks that if he did Kiddushin with Almanah and then he became Kohen Gadol, that he can go ahead and marry her. Tamudamadi kach isha, because the extra words in the pasuk in Vayikra. And here's the full pasuk: Almanah grusha chalazonat ele lo yikach kim betula me'amav. So we know Kohen Gadol cannot marry Almanah and so on. And then it says two more words: yikach isha. Only from betula yikach isha. But it could have just said kim betula me'amav. Period. The word yikach isha comes to include that there is someone in the list beforehand who he can in fact marry as an Isha. And who is that? That would be an Almana. So that if she was an Almana and he already did Kiddushin, then you can finish and do Nisuin, Yikach Isha. Okay, so that's how we learn it. Now, well, if you're learning it from there, then why not also include the Shomeret Yavam? The second case said and say, since the brother died beforehand, see, everyone agrees, if someone's already Kohen Gadol, and then his brother dies without children, he cannot do Yibum, she's an Almanah. But if he died beforehand, when he was a Kohen, and now was a regular Kohen, so he was permitted to her. And so now they're like engaged, especially if it does Ma'amad, so you might think that should be the same thing. So we say, no, Isha velo Yevamah. It says Yikach Isha. He can only take someone who is his own wife, because he did Kiddushin with her already. But this does not include a Yevamah, who was really his brother's wife, and he is only continuing that relationship that he had with his brother. It was not the Kiddushin was not from his own initiative. Okay, and now the story Maaseh Bihoshua Minahu in Nitmana la, and there's just noting that in the story it says that he was appointed Minahu Hamelech, that the king appointed him to become Kohen Gadol. The point is that he was only legitimate because the king appointed him, but he was not actually worthy of being appointed. This was unfortunately the case during some time periods during Second Bet HaMikdash, that someone who was not worthy of being Kohen Gadol would bribe their way to becoming Kohen. They would give a bribe to, in times before the Hashmonaim, they bribed the Hellenistic Greek king to become Kohen Gadol. So he was appointed, yes. The king appointed him, yes, but he was not worthy of being appointed. Amar Rav Yosef Ketir Kahazena Hacha. Rav Yosef says there's a conspiracy here. Well, something strange going on. This was not the proper appointment, but should be supposed to be by the Sanhedrin, but rather is because of politics and a bribe. Amar Rav Asi. Tarkeba de dinare ayla le martabat baitos leyanai malka ad mokela Yoshua ben Gamla bechahane rabrebe. Because in fact, martabat baitos brought this giant vessel full of dinar to King Yanai, because she was almost had kiddushin with him. She wanted her husband to be Kohen Gadol. Oh, why not? And she could be the first lady Kohen Gadol. And so she bribed a huge amount to King Yanai. King Yanai cannot be the King Yanai we know from the Talmud Chashmonaim, because that would have been a couple of hundred years before Martha and Yoshua ben Gamla lived. So it might have been someone else who we are associating with him, maybe King Agrippa. And until that king made Yoshua ben Gamla into the Kohen Gadol. And so here we see a little historical hint to some of the corruption that was one factor in leading to the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Next Mishnah, Kohen Gadol shemet achiv, holes velo meyabehem. Kohen Gadol and his brother died without children. He cannot do Yibum, but he does need to do Chalitza. So this is the more simple case, not without Ma'amad that we saw before. If he did Ma'amad, then he would have to do Yibum and also give a get. Okay, so Kohen Gadol cannot perform Yibum because he would then be marrying an Almanah. Gemara asks, Kapasik vetaneh. Lo shana mina erusin v'lo shana mina nisuin. Notice that the Mishnah gives a clear-cut categorical prohibition without any distinction between whether the deceased brother had only kiddushin with the Yevamah or nisuin with the Yevamah. So it makes no difference. The Kohen Gadol cannot do Yibum either way. Now, bishlama mina nisuin aseh velo ta'asehu ven aseh doche lo ta'aseh va'aseh. We understand if the brother who died had been married to the Yevamah, so then she is not only an almanah, she is also a be'ulah. She's not betulah. And so in that case, if the Kohen Gadol would take her in marriage, he would be violating both an aseh and a lo taseh. He cannot take an almanah, and he must take a betulah. And she is not a betulah, and she is almanah. So for sure, the misvat aseh vibum is not going to override both a positive and a negative prohibition. So for sure, that's a simple case of if she had been married. Ela min erusin, but if she only was mikudeshet to the brother and then he died, and so there was no bi'ah, so she still is a betulah. The problem is only almanah. Yavo aseh v'yitchet lo ta'aseh. Then the misvat aseh of yibum should override the lo ta'aseh of marrying an almanah. This brings us back all the way to the beginning of the Masechet, where we discussed that rule. And the answer is, you're right. Technically, Kohen Gadol could do Yibum with a Yevamah who was only Mikudeshet, because Aseh Dochelot Aseh. However, the rabbis forbid it. Gezerah, Bi'ah Rishona, Atu Bi'ah Sheniyah. We make a Gezerah the first time they have Bi'ah for the second time. Only the first time is a mitzvah of Yibum. After that, they are married, and normal case, they can continue and stay married. But for a Kohen Gadol, every subsequent bi'ah would be a violation because she had been an almanah. The first time they do bi'ah, that's a mitzvah, will override, but not the next time. So really, the Kohen Gadol, to do it properly, he would have to do bi'ah, fulfill the mitzvah, and then he'd have to divorce her. But they may end up liking each other, and then they'll stay married, and then that will lead to the second time. And so in order to avoid that altogether, it's also not respectful to have bi'ah only one time and then that's it. It's not really a marriage, and so therefore better to just do chalitza and not get into that relationship to begin with. Okay, next Mishnah. Kohen Hedyot lo yisa ailonit elem ken yesh lo isha ubanim. A regular Kohen should not marry Ailonit means a woman who is not fully sexually developed, and she won't be able to have children. So Kohen Gadol should not marry her unless he already has a wife and children. So we want the Kohen to be able to have a family, and if he already has a family and already has children, then he can marry an Ailonit. But if he doesn't have one yet, then he's not going to fulfill the mitzvah of having Pidyah v'Dibyah. And so Kohen should not marry an Ailonit unless he already has children. The Gemara will ask, well, isn't that true for a non-Kohen too? Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af al pi sheyesh lo isha banim lo yisa ailonit shehi zona ha'amura b'Torah. Rabbi Yehuda is much more machmir, and he says even if he already has a wife and children from beforehand, he still should not marry ailonit because he defines zona as even this case. The point is that he's going to be having relations with her without any possibility of having children, and therefore it's only for pleasure and not for children. So he defines that as a zona. We already saw many definitions of the word zona, some more negative than others. So it's not necessarily a total negative. We're going to see now a whole list of definitions. So the Yehuda is more expansive, and he says, no, a Kohen can only be married to someone who potentially can have children. Okay, what about if she's minor? What about if she's older? All good questions. Okay, Chachamim omerim en zona ela gioret umeshuchreret shenibala beilad zenu. Chachamim say no, zona is not such an expansive definition. Zona only means someone who was a convert, because or a Eved, a Shivcha Kananit, someone who was not Jewish became a Shivcha, and then was freed and became a Jewess, because while they were in their previous state, they probably had relations and had bi'ah which is defined as zinut, and there it was not within the context of kiddushin. They couldn't possibly do kiddushin because they weren't Jewish, and so Chamim have a more limited definition, and therefore they say no, there's no problem. If he doesn't have children, then he should make sure to marry someone so that he can have a family. But if he already has children, a Kohen can marry an Ailonit according to Chachamim. All right. Amar le resh galuta le Rav Huna. My ta'ama mishum pirya v'ribya. A pirya v'ribya kohanim hu de mipakedi. V'Yisrael lo mipakedi. Okay, the exilarch, he's the head of the Jewish community in Bavel. He asks Rav Huna, what's the reason that a Kohen cannot marry an Ailonit? Because he has to fulfill the mitzvah of having children. Wait, Pirya v'Ribya, Kohanim only are the only ones that are commanded, and Israel is not commanded? Surely every Jew is commanded to have children. So therefore, why specify only a Kohen cannot marry Ailonit? It should say anyone. Any man cannot marry an Ailonit unless he already has children. Okay, good question. Amale mishum deka ba'elimit nesefa. Rabbi Yehuda omer af al pi sheyesh lo isha ויש לו בנים לא יישא עילונית, שהיא זונה מורה בתורה. תזונה כהנים הוא מפקדי, וישראל לא מקפדי משום הכי, קטני כהן. So Rav Huna's answer is, you're right. In fact, that would be true for Yisrael also. Should not marry an Ailonit unless he already has children. How come it says Kohen Ejot? It only specifies that because of Rabbi Yehuda, who is going to be the one that argues and is more stringent, but he's only more stringent in the case of a Kohen. A Kohen cannot marry a Zonah, and he defines a Zonah to include any act of intercourse that could not potentially lead to having children. So that's why, because this has to say in the Sefer, Rabbi Yehuda says even if he has children, he should not marry an Ailonit because she is called a Zonah. Only Kohanim are prohibited from marrying a Zonah, and Israel are not commanded regarding a Zonah. So that's why in the Resha it says Kohen. But in fact, if a man does not have children yet, he should not marry an Ailonit. Amar Rav Huna, my tamad Rabbi Yehuda, dichtiv achelu velo yisbau hiznu velo yifrotzu. What's a source for Rabbi Yehuda that he calls such a person, an Ailonit, calls her a Zonah? It's from Pasuk in Hosea that says he's describing people who eat and they're not eating, and they never have enough. They're eating only for pleasure and not for sustenance. And similarly, people who commit zinut and not yifrotzu, and not for having children. It's only intercourse for its own sake, for pleasure, and not for having children. So that's called, you see, he's new. That's called zinut. So therefore, kol bi'ashen ba'pirsa, and not ela bilad zinut. Any act of intercourse that does not have the possibility of increasing population is called zinut. That's Rabbi Yehuda's source. Now, Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kohen lo yisa et ketana. All right, now we have a related law in a Braita that according to Rabbi Eliezer, that's Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos, he says a Kohen may not marry a minor. Okay, this seems to be related, but more different from a more expensive than just an Ilonit, a minor also who a minor girl who cannot have children, at least not yet. A Kohen should not marry her. All right, so that's what we have in the Braita. We're going to analyze this. Amar le Rav Chisda le Rabba, pukayen ba urta ba'e la Rav Huna minach. So the third generation of Moraim, Rav Chisda and Rabbah, what Rav Chisda tells Rabbah, you better look into this Baraita, because I have it on a good source that in the morning, Rav Huna, our teacher, Rav Huna's second generation, so he's their mutual teacher, Rav Huna is going to ask this question from you, okay? Somehow, Rav Chisda got a sneak peek at the curriculum for the next day's shiur, and he's going to ask you this question, so you better prepare and do your homework. So he did, nafak ayen ba. Rabba went and analyzed it, and this is what he concluded. Rabbi Eliezer, Sabala Rabbi Meir, Vesabala Rabbi Yoshua. We're going to see a few different explanations. Why does Rabbi Eliezer, why does he have this chumrah and say a kohen cannot marry a minor? So this is going to be the first, and we are going to reject it, but offer some others. Okay, so the first explanation is that Rabbi Eliezer follows Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda. If he agrees with both of these sages, although Rabbi Eliezer is from a prior generation, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, nevertheless he follows the same opinion that they do. Then we can make sense of it. So what are the two things that they say? Savad la Rabbi Meir de chayish lemi'ota, v'savad la Rabbi Yehuda damar ailonit zona havya. He follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir that we worry about a minority case. If they have a minor, you can't tell when a girl is a minor, you can't tell if she is going to be an ailonit or not just yet, because either way, as a minor, she can't have children. We're not sure. Will she develop normally? Most people do, but there is a minority who will not develop and will not be able to have children. So Rabbi Meir says we have to worry about that minority, and therefore, anytime someone marries a minor girl, there's a chance that there might be an Ailonit that we have to take into consideration. That's number one. And he also follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, who says Ailonit is defined as a zonah. If Ailonit is defined as a zonah, then if a Kohen marries a minor, there's always a chance that this minor may be an Ailonit, and therefore may be a Zonah. Even though it's only a minority chance, we have to take that into account, because that's what Rabbi Meir says. And therefore, putting these two assumptions together, no Kohen should ever marry a minor, just in case she grows up and becomes an Ailonit, and that would be a Zonah. Okay, if you deny any of those, if you don't worry about minority cases, or if you think that a Kohen can marry an Ailonit, because an Ailonit is not if you don't consider a Zonah, either way, it would be permitted. Only if you have both of these assumptions would you conclude what Rabbi Eliezer said. Okay, so this is what Rabbah came up with. But we're going to challenge this. Does Rabbi Eliezer really agree with this opinion of Rabbi Meir that we worry about minority opinions? V'hatanya, katan uktana lo chosin velo miyabemin. Divrei Rabbi Meir. A minor boy and a minor girl cannot do chalitza, and they cannot do yibum, according to Rabbi Meir. אמרו לו לרבי מאיר, יפה אמרת שאין חוסין איש כתיב בפרשה ומקשינן אישה לאיש. So the other sages told Rabbi Meir, we agree with you. It makes sense that you said that a minor cannot perform chalitza, because the pasuk does in fact say the word ish. It's right here. Kach ayaseh laish. So in the context of chalitza, it says the word ish, which means that only an adult can do chalitza and not a minor. And we make a hekesh, the man to the woman, just like has to be a man that gives the chalitza, so to the Yevamot has to be an adult. Fine, so only adults can do chalitza. You need that level of da'at for it. Ela ma'itama en miyabemin, but yibum, why are you saying that a child cannot do yibum? Amar lahem, Rabbi Meir answered, Katan shema yimase saris, ketana shema timase ailonit, nimseu pogin ba'arva. We saw above that you don't need a high level of da'at in order to do yibum. So it's not like doing a marriage or like chalitza where you need a full amount of dat. So rather, what's the problem? Rabbi Meir says, oh, we worry about a minority situation. This katan, this boy, he may end up being a sadis. Sadis here they translate as eunuch or someone who's castrated. It doesn't mean quite that here. It could also mean that, but here it means that a boy who does not fully develop. And therefore, when he becomes an adult, cannot have children. And we can't tell that yet. So this katan, he may grow up and not be able to have children. Or the ketana, if she is a minor, the yevama, then when she grows up, we may find out that in fact she's an ailonit. And an ailonit cannot do yibum. The whole point of yibum is in order to have a child that will uphold the name of the deceased. And if she is an ailonit, then yibum does not apply. And if yibum does not apply, then they will end up having bi'ah, and that will be erva. It's his brother's wife. Anytime you do bi'ah and it's not for yibum, and yibum does not apply, then it ends up being arayot. So just in case, if it turns out that she's an ailonit, we worry about the minority case, and therefore we do not allow minors to do yibum, just in case the minority case that they cannot have children, and that will turn out to be adva. V'tanya ketana mityabemet ve'na choleset divrei Rabbi Eliezer. But all that was the opinion of Rabbi Meir. We have a braita that says a minor can do yibum, but not chalitza, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So you see, Rabbi Eliezer, while he agrees with chalitza, everyone agrees that it has to be an adult to do chalitza. He disagrees with yibum and says that a minor woman can receive chalitza. And so therefore Rabbi Eliezer does not worry about the minority case. What are the chances that she's going to be an ailonit? Very small. Don't worry about it. She can do chalitza, and we don't have to worry that maybe she'll grow up and be an ailonit, and then the chalitza was not a minor can do yibum, right? And Rabbi Eliezer says a minor can do yibum, and we don't worry about that minority case that maybe she'll go up and be ailonit, and then now this yibum is a problem. Don't worry about it; it's a small minority. So, in fact, sorry, Rabba, that assumption number one, that Rabbi Eliezer is following Rabbi Meir, does not work, because we know that Rabbi Eliezer does not agree with Rabbi Meir. And furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda misabar, and he also doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda's definition of zona, that an ailonit is a zona. And we know that from the following baraita that lists all different opinions. There's a central baraita because these opinions are scattered in different places, but here we have them all in one place. V'hatanya. Zona kishma divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer has a small definition of zona. Zona is, according to the peshat way of understanding it, someone who commits adultery. That's a zona, and not an ailonit. You don't call other things. All right. So Rabbi Eliezer already, you see, he does not agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Akiva omer zona zo mufkeret. Rabbi Akiva has a slightly more expansive definition. Zona is anyone who is loose, who she'll go with any man. That's zona. Rabbi Matya ben Harash omer afilu halach ba'ala lashkota u'ba'ala baderech asa'a zona. Rabbi Matya has a slightly more expansive definition. Even if a case of sota, case where the husband warns her, don't be alone with that guy, and she goes and she secludes alone with that guy. And now he says, okay, now I'm declaring you a sota. You come with me to Yerushalayim. So they go so they're on their way to Yerushalayim. Normally the Bet Din will send to Talmidei Chachamim to watch them, to make sure that they are not together. Husband and wife are not allowed to be together after he accuses her as a sotah and makes her to come and drink. From that time until she actually comes and does the sotah ceremony in the Bet HaMikdash, because she is suspected of possibly being a sotah, he is not allowed to be with her. Okay, let's say somehow those two Talmidei Chachamim, they go for a coffee break, and he is with his wife during that time on their way to drink, and they have bi'ah on the way. That is also a zona, assuming she participates willingly. So this is the most lenient case of prohibited relations, because after all, it's actually with her own husband. even that is called a zonah because they are prohibited to each other during that time. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, more definitions. Zonah zo'ailonit is Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, that ailonit, someone who cannot have children, that is called a zonah because any relations with her will not result in procreation. Chachamim omerim en zona ela girot meshuchreret shin bala be'ilat zenut. We also saw the sages in our Mishnah, and this is the halacha l'maaseh, by the way, that we follow the majority chachamim that say zona means someone who was not Jewish, they converted or they became shifcha Kanaanit and had intercourse in a zenut way, because they don't do kiddushin. There's no possibility of kiddushin when they weren't Jewish. That's that's what zonah means. Rabbi Elazar Omer panui haba ala penuya shelo l'shem mishut asa'ah zonah. Not Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that we're talking about. He has a very small, narrow definition of zinut, only adultery. But Rabbi Elazar has the very expansive definition. Even a single man and a single woman who have no prohibition of being together, but if it's not for the purpose of marriage, anything outside the context of marriage, that is also called a zonah. All right, anyway, the point is, we have lots of different, but the main point is that Rabbi Eliezer does not agree with the definition of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we need another answer to explain how come Rabbi Eliezer says that a kohen cannot marry a minor. So here's answer number 2. Elamar Rav Ada bar Ahava. Hacha bekohen gadol askinan. No, Rabbi Eliezer was talking about any kohen, only kohen gadol. Lemat kanila lechi gadla be'olahi. The problem is that the kohen gadol, if he marries a minor, right? So then, as a minor, she's not fully married to him. So when is the marriage going to be complete? When she becomes an adult. But when she becomes an adult, she already is be'ula from the time that they married while she was a minor. And therefore, the Kohen Gadol the marriage is coming into full effect when she's not a betula, when she's a be'ula. And that's the problem. That's why Kohen Gadol should not marry a minor. Okay, that second answer. Amar Rava mechaleleb. Rava says other versions has mibelileb. This is without understanding. This explanation. This is not true. I de kiddusha abu mehahi sha'atahu de kanila vi de kiddusha nafsha ha de Eliezer hi velo rabban. Rava challenges Ravada and says, what's the case? If her father had given her over as a minor in kiddushin, well, when a father gives over a minor in kiddushin, that kiddushin is full marriage right from the time that it happens, even as a minor. So there's nothing shifts when she becomes an adult. If in fact her father gave her over to this kohen gadol in marriage, so that wouldn't be the case. Ida kadisha nafsha, and if she went and married herself off without the father, in which case it does not take full effect until she becomes an adult. Rabbi Eliezer he velo Rabbanan. Well, is that only the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer and not Rabbanan? If everyone would agree, even Rabbanan would agree in such a case, that a Kohen Gadol cannot marry her because when she first gets married as a minor, she is it does not take full effect, and then they will consummate the marriage, and she will not be a betula anymore, and then she'll become an adult, and then the marriage will take full effect, and Kohen Gadol cannot marry a be'ula. And everyone would agree with that, not only it really is. So that can't be the case. Sorry, Rav Ada. Ela Rava gives a third suggestion. Le'olam be'kohen hejot. Talking about a regular kohen. Rabbi Eliezer didn't say kohen gadol, so and why can't a regular kohen marry a minor? Because minor, we are worried that she may be seduced. A minor, she's not strong in her will. Some other guy may come and seduce her, and then that will be a problem. Well, then we should not allow anyone to marry a minor because she may be seduced and commit adultery, even if it's Israel. So he answers, no, someone who's seduced is like someone who's raped, and someone who is raped is permitted to remain with their husband who's a Yisrael. it's not considered like if it was willing adultery, then she cannot go back to her husband no matter what. But if it's seduced or ones, she can go back if it's Yisrael, but not if it's a Kohen. For a Kohen, even if his wife is seduced or raped, she cannot go back and be with him. So that's why we should not, a Kohen should not marry a minor, because a minor is more likely she'll be seduced as an adult. She'll know how to refuse. Rav Papa Amar, and yet last answer. Rav Papa says, Bekohen Gadol, no, Rabbi Eliezer, when he says a Kohen should not marry a minor, it's Tomar Kohen Gadol. V'haitanahu detanya betula yachol ketana tomod omar isha. Isha yachol bogeret tomod omar betula hakesad yasta mikol katnut v'echlal bagrut lo bata. Rather, this follows the following beraita, not for any of the reasons we said above, but rather Kohen Gadol has to marry a ne'ara, and that's implied by the words that the pasuk uses. On the one hand, it says Kohen Gadol has to marry a betula. So even if she's under 12, no, it says isha, and isha implies an adult. Well, isha yachol bogeret. So if it's an adult, that means even more than 12 and a half. When she is considered a full adult? No, it says betula. How can you have it in between? How could she be both betula, which and bogeret? How could she be young and old and fulfill both of these definitions? Oh, it has to be that she left the category of being a minor but has not yet become an adult. When is that? Na'ara. It's that between period between 12 and 12 and a half. She's called na'ara, and in that case, on the one hand, she is an isha, but is still a betula, and so that's the so we learned that from the Pesukim. We saw this was also the opinion of Rabbi Meir before, that it can't be a bogeret, but now this is adding also that she can't be too young, not too old, just right. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Hay Tanahu Tetanya betula en betula ela na'ara v'chen omer na'ara tobat mar'eh me'od betula. Rav Nachman, along the same lines as the Papa, also says talking about a Kohen Gadol, and follows the following baraita that ends up in the same conclusion, that the word betula by itself means a na'ara between 12 and 12 and a half on average. As it says regarding Rivka, that Rivka was a na'ara, and she was very beautiful, and she was betula. And so that means, see, it says na'ara and betula in the same sentence describing Rivka. So what does the word betula means? Na'ara. And na'ara means between 12 and 12 and a half. So there you go. That's the conclusion. The Rabbi Eliezer was talking about a Kohen Gadol, and he has to marry. He cannot marry a minor, because then that would not be na'ara. That would be a ketana. Incidentally, you learn from here that although Rashi has an explanation that Rivka was 3 years old, that actually is not found in any. It's based on Seder Olam Rabbah, based on some Midrashim, but you see that is not the opinion of the Talmud here. The Gemara here assumes that she is about 12 and not 3. Which nowadays would be still too young, but back in biblical times, was just about right. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Panui haba ala penuya shelo l'shem ishut, asa'a zona. And lastly, in the Braita that had all the definitions of what zona is, Rabbi Elazar was of the most expansive opinion that says any single man and single woman who are together not for the purpose of marriage, even in those cases, she is called zona. Amar Rav Amram, en halacha ke Rabbi Elazar. Halacha does not follow Rabbi Elazar. All right, let us begin at least the next Mishnah, a very famous one, about the definition of the mitzvah of Peru Urvu. Lo yibatel adam mipirav rivya ela imken yesh lo banim. A person should not neglect the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying unless he already has children. What's the definition? Bet Shammai omrim shnei zecharim, or Bet Hillel omrim zachar unkeva, shnemar zachar unkeva bera'am. Definition of the fulfillment of Peru Urvu, according to Bet Shammai, is two boys. Once someone has 2 boys, then they fulfilled Peru Urvu, and then they can stop. Bet Hillel says, no, it has to be one boy and one girl. After all, at the beginning of creation, it says male and female, Hashem created them. And so just like Hashem created one boy and one girl, so too, each and every person is required, at minimum, to have a boy and a girl. And only then are more children optional. All right, so that's the Mishnah. The Gemara says, "Ha yesh lo banim mepirya v'ribya batil, meisha lo batil." So the initial inference of the Mishnah is that it says that one can refrain from having more children after he fulfilled the minimum requirement for pirya v'ribya. Oh yes, he can stop having children, but doesn't mean he can stop being married. Being married is still a requirement. That's good in and of itself for a man to be married. This inference will support the statement of Shemuel, who said, even if a person has many children, still he should not remain single without a wife, because after all, look at what Adam before Chava was created. It says not good for a man to be by himself. So he's going to be lonely, and he won't have a place to put his energies, and so it's good, very good for a man to be married, independent of his fulfillment of having children. All right, that's one version. V'ika de amre, another version. Ha yesh lo banim batil mepirya v'ribya u batil nami meisha. The other way of other inference is more expansive. It says that a person should not stop having children unless he already fulfilled. That means if he didn't fulfill it already, then he can stop having children, and he doesn't need to be married also, because after all, isn't that the main point of being married? But Tilnami Meisha, is that a good inference? And this, according to this second inference, that after someone fulfilled Piru Vu, he doesn't have to be married anymore, this would be a challenge to Shemuel, who said that it's not good for a man to be alone no matter what. I would say, no, it's not necessarily a challenge. En lo banim no se isha bat banim. Yesh lo banim no se isha de la bat banim. No, we're going back to our first inference and saying, the only difference, yes, a person should be married no matter what. The only difference is, if he has no children, he should make sure to marry a woman who can bear children. If he already has children, then he can marry a woman who is not able to bear children. But either way, he should be married one way or another. That is good for him for its own sake. A practical difference would be to sell a Sefer Torah. We learned back in Masechet Megillah that one may not sell a Sefer Torah except if it's to support either learning Torah or in order to pay a bride price for a wife who can bear him children. So if it's like, let's say a person cannot afford a bride price unless he sells Sefer Torah. If he already has children, so then he can find a wife for a lower bride price who cannot bear children, and that's good. He'll not be alone. But if he does not have children yet, then he has to even sell Sefer Torah in order to pay that higher bride price for a wife who can bear him children. And so that would be a practical difference between them. And the continuation, and the next stuff, we're going to see the derivations for the opinions of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen ve'amen.